autónomo. YouTube kan mereka berbeda status visualizar Indonesia dulu. Visualizar okay. If you want to kind of visual, I go to and you kind of separate.
Hello and welcome all participants, panelists, and our invitees to the webinar hosted by the Department of Philosophy and the Department of English, HATIM, Higher and Technical Institute, Mizoram. Tonight is our second night, and we have as our speaker Mr. Sizo Numboya. Mr. Sizo Numboya is an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science at St. Xavier's College, Lengpui, Mizoram. He has completed his MPhil in Jawaharlal Nehru University and is currently pursuing his PhD from the Center for Political Studies in JNU. His areas of interests are political and legal theories, history of political movements in Northeast India, especially among tribal communities, and political economy of development. He has published several articles in academic journals, edited books and daily newspapers on identity, struggles of oppressed and marginalized communities, and free speech. Among the several articles he has published, let me highlight a few. The article titled The Making and Unmaking of Tsin, Kuki, Mizo Identity in Indo-Myanmar Borderlands was presented at the Asian Borderland Research Network Conference, Borderland Spaces, Ruins, Revival, and Resources at the American University of Central Asia. Another one that I will highlight is titled Rethinking Rambuai, Violence and Nation Building Among the Margins in Northeast India at the International Seminar on Writing History, the Highlanders of Northeast India, organized by the Department of History and Ethnography at Mizoram University. Tonight, we are extremely proud and honored to have in our midst and to have as our speaker Mr. Cizo Nunmoya. Mr. Cizo Nunmoya, if you would, we welcome you officially and we want you to feel free. This is a platform where you can share all your thoughts and all your concerns very freely. So I will hand over the platform to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Janet. And first of all, I would like to thank HATIM College for giving us this wonderful opportunity on the conversations on Zoe identity, and a very interesting theme indeed. At the same time, I'm not sure whether I'm the right person to speak on this issue. So we have uh, two other distinguished speakers. We had wonderful lecture yesterday from Dr. Sam, and the topic that I'm going to sort of discuss today is nationalism, culture, and politics, reimagining Chin Cookie Mizo identity in South Asia. It's quite vast, and it's going to be a very daunting task. And at the same time, uh, I won't spend uh, a lot of time on the presentation. I am more eager to have interactive session at the end of the uh, speech. And first of all, uh, since I use three big concepts at the title of my talk, nationalism, culture, and politics. So each concept, I think, requires maybe at least 2 3 hours each to even clarify what really means nationalism, culture, politics. There can be a variety of explanation and understandings on these three big concepts. But for the purpose of our talk tonight, I will sort of try and limit myself into a few explanations. And the first of all, I would just want to uh, uh, give a brief explanation to the notions of nationalism as we understood today. And nationalism is primarily understood as loyalty and devotion to a particular nation or nationality. Or we can also say it's a sense of belonging or feeling of ownership to a particular nation, and a sense of national consciousness exalting one nation above all others. And we are also witnessing right now, because of the Mizoram Assam border problem, there has been, I guess, the sort of upsurge of nationalistic feelings, particularly within the Mizo society. And one of the well-known scholars of nationalism, Benedict Anderson, notion of collective or shared imagination is also very relevant for us, for our talk tonight, and his imagined political community. And when we talk about culture, here I would simply mean a way of life, or way of doing things, or way of thinking that encompasses social behavior and norms found in human societies, especially uh, uh, for the Zou community. A system of inherited conceptions, according to Clifford Geer's, I quote, "A culture is a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms by means of which men communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge about and attitudes towards life." And the last one, politics. Uh, there are uh, various conceptions of politics. What is political? What is apolitical? But for our talk, so I would simply use politics as a human collective affairs, individual as well as collective pursuit of a particular goal, or even relationship between individuals and groups in order to survive together in a given society or in a given community. So, but I will spend most of my time on this Chin Kuki Mizo identity issue, and without actually dealing with those three big concepts into detail, let me go into the heart of the presentation. Over the long history of civilizations, human beings have developed complex forms of identity, which makes problems sometimes as well as possibilities to be able to live together, and we draw on narratives from our past to create common identities of the future. Historical narratives have played and continue to play an important role in the political development and national consolidation of states and ethnic territories in South Asia and elsewhere. One cannot deny the fact that history serves an important basis for ethnic or cultural mobilization and a means to create some sort of manufactured consensus on national past. In most cases in the South Asian region, even if we look particularly at the Indian subcontinent, national narratives have been established as opposed to the colonial histories. And in conflict situations like the one we are facing right now, history serves as a powerful force to legitimize claims over territories, resources, and people. And it is often being used as it is often being used as a tool of political competition rather than mere critical analysis of the historical past. And this talk will try to revisit and interrogate a very long history of socio-political imaginaries, and right from maybe from the pre-colonial period to the post-colonial period. And we'll be focusing on uh, particularly the South Asian region, because I don't want to limit myself and this talk and this conversation only within one political or geographical territory. That's the reason why I deliberately use South Asia in the theme, in the topic itself. And we will try particularly and understand the genealogy of state and authority among the Zhou and the role of state in making and unmaking of the identities of the Chin Kuki Mizo group in the South Asian region. At the same time, when we talk about the South Asian region, our focus is more or less within this uh, Myanmar, India, Bangladesh, even though there are uh, quite a few places now where our people live and settle. And at the same time, there will be attempt to venture out possible alternative views and understanding of these long historical processes while challenging the popular notion of authority, especially the colonial authority and the post-colonial state. And it will also interrogate the processes of constructing politico-territorial boundaries among the Zhou people and its related communities in those geographical spaces to highlight how nation-building projects through various government schemes and policies are being implemented with mixed reactions as well as consequences. Since people from these regions have the claim of shared historical past. So I'm saying the claim. And since these groups of people have the claim of shared historical past and cultural affinity, one needs to look at how different networks are made and disrupted through various forces in these contiguous regions. And if possible, I'll also make an attempt to throw some lights on how individuals and communities tried and failed to reconcile their notions of primordial affiliations, which are not necessarily determined by strict territorial boundaries, and their newly constructed political identities within nation states during decolonization and after decolonization. And one of the focus of this paper, as I've already mentioned, was to trace the genealogy of the state and authority in the process of making and unmaking of a collective identity, which is intricately manifested in a small community like the Mizo, the Chin, the Kuki, and the incomplete or continuous project of nation building through various legal institutional mechanisms like tribe or clan classifications and periodical census carried out by state agencies of various countries like India and Myanmar from colonial period till date. And first of all, I would like to talk a bit about the uh, Mizo experience and the production, and because we cannot start without, when we talk about identities, we cannot start without history. I would like to talk a bit about the production and representation of history, particularly in the Mizo Hills, the Lusai Hills. And the early recorded history of the Mizo and different sub-tribes or clans within it is virtually based on, as we all know, literature, folklores, legends, traditional beliefs, and myths. And those who want to study the people, whether they are historians or anthropologists or ethnographers or any other scholars, they surely face difficulties in tracing the historical evolution of, say, the Mizos. In spite of that, there are many folk tales, folk songs, and fables that provide raw materials for the study of their migration and early settlement in the regions. And there is a common belief among the Zhou people that even uh, uh, the present uh, territory, political territory of Mizoram, there is a common belief among them that their ancestors immigrated from a place called Chinlung. It's a mythical cave, as I think we all already know this mythical notion, mythical cave notion of Chinlung. So I call it mythical because uh, uh, we have not been able to find out where this Chinlung exactly is located. So some historians and anthropologists are of the opinion that the place is somewhere in southern China, and there are lots of debates on this. But I'm not interested in the where exactly is the location. I'm more interested in how we use Chinlung as a network, as a sort of our source of identity, where we all, I mean, when I talk about we, the Chin Kuki Mizo group, when we all have some more or less the same connection to that particular cave, at least in our historical narrative. And we and we also know about the uh, migration history and how the people were pushed out of this Chinlung or Sinlung or Kul or Kurpui, whatever you call. It is commonly believed that their forefathers came from the cave one by one, and you know about the famous loud talk by the royalty, and which sort of affect, or which sort of have a very one interesting consequences. Um, so I hope there are many royalties here even tonight among our audience. So I hope you don't make noise during our lectures and conversation. And according to ethnographical categorization and linguistic affinity, a major chunk of population is said to belong to this group, the Kuki-Chin group of Indo-Tibetan Burman. And some people even call themselves, like the title of our talk, Chin Kuki Mizo, sometimes in short, Chikim. Lately, in order to include all Zo and its cognate tribes under one umbrella, and there can be different kinds of views on how inclusive is this notion of Zo. And it is often said that the Kuki, Chin, Mizo, or Chilungchuak are ethnologically descendant of one ancestor, knit together by common tradition, customs, culture, language, and social life. And they live in different places, different countries like India, Myanmar, Bangladesh. And through the influence of time and events, this group widely dispersed, especially before administrative delimitations were carried out. As a result, the inhabitants of these groups were found to be dispersed in significant percentages in some districts of Manipur, Assam, and the eastern part of Jaintia Hills district of Meghalaya and North Tripura district. Besides, they are also found in a large number across frontiers in Burma and Bangladesh. And especially when we look at the Mizo history writing and historical books, and there are some people who sort of seem to have the opinion that this the Mizo historical narratives basically revolves around the Luce migration, uh, especially the migration history, excluding other groups like the old Kuki group, who are known to have migrated prior to the westward migration of Silo and its related Luce clans. The diversity of various groups reflects the historical immigration patterns, and a deeper dig into this migration pattern could clearly show that different tribes and sub-tribes arrived in the present Mizoram in successive ways and settled down in different parts of the states. Further, as they arrived, there were raids, fear of raids, intertribal feuds, which forced the weaker groups among them to leave the region for their survival. The resulting isolation and separation created numerous tribes and sub-tribes among those migrating communities. And the All Kuki group is known to have reached the present Mizoram a little earlier than Luce and its related tribes, but these stories are not clearly highlighted in the popular history of, in the popular Mizo history of migration. And we also have a very little knowledge about migration in the southern part of Mizoram, particularly among the Lais and Maras, since they are basically excluded for most of the Mizo history writings, which some people suspect it merely as the Luce-centric historical narratives. And some historians uh, even project feuds and intertribal rivalries among those groups as fights between, suppose, uh, Mizo chiefs and uh, the Poi chief, the Lai chiefs, or Mizo chiefs or Sukta chiefs. So, which were basically conflicts between some Silo and Lai chiefs, or Silo and or Luce chiefs, or some Sukta chiefs. So this kind of historical misrepresentation in the form of academic writing or even school textbooks can easily create uh, 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 unnecessary sort of tension and misunderstanding among different groups. Historians and some political leaders also make mistakes in the production of knowledge as well as representing our historical past. History writing, however, history writing has always been a focus of political battle in places like India. Over a long period of time, it has been one of the main tasks and conscious attempt of a particular regime, the center, to produce a uniform or singular historical narratives. neglecting the existence of a variety of cultural and religious traditions in India. Likewise, it is possible to draw some parallel on, especially in the context of India, on the National Indian History Writing Project, which is sort of initiated by some groups of people. I wouldn't name them, but I think them very well. And the kind of knowledge production, especially the historical knowledge production that we also have in this part of the world, which does not give space to the less dominant groups of people. And I would like to talk a bit about in the second part the advent of the colonial power and the new language of authority among the groups that we are talking about. And uh, especially in the Lusai Hills, the British occupation of Lusai Hills, the annexation of Lusai Hills started in and around 1890, after the Chin Lusai expedition of 1889-1890, and the hills were formally declared as part of British India. And there is no doubt that the rise of colonialism massively undermines the power and authority of the chiefs. Some of them were even captured and sent to jail by the British colonial administration. Even those who retained their chieftainship were under the mercy of the British rule. Initially, the British divided the Lusai Hills into the North and Lusai Hills, but later amalgamated. And then in 1898, the Lusai Hills was constituted under the province of Assam. And prior to the British annexation, it might be also safe to say that the land primarily belonged to the chiefs during those times. And the British somehow continued to protect the institutions of chieftainship per se, and the land they occupied, because it seems the British did not actually want to completely replace chieftainship with a new authority, even though they controlled most of the chiefs through their agents. However, the colonial power also forcefully replaced those village chiefs who fought against the colonial administration and imprisoned some of them to death, like the famous Lalnuro Puiliani. And during the British period, there were two famous regulations to protect the land from outsiders, namely the famous, which is more famous these days because of the border conflict, the Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation, 1873, and the Chin Hills Regulation, 1876, and the later became redundant after India got independence. And the Government of India Act of 1919 and 1915 and 1919 categorized Lusai Hills as backward tracts and excluded them from the, politically from the purview of new provincial legislature. And again, in 1935, the British, after passing the Government of India Act 1935, further declared the hills as excluded areas, excluding them fully from the federal and provincial legislatures as well as from the jurisdiction of their courts. This radical shift of power center deeply unsettles a very sort of close-knit society like ours, who used to live under the rule of village chiefs. They started realizing that there's more powerful authority than their long cherished chieftainship, which in turn creates a mixed feeling towards the general population. At the same time, even while we were talking about the sometimes the mistakes made by the British colonial power, at the same time, the colonial power unites the people in the Lusai Hills and even in the other parts of Chin Hills and even in the Manipur Hills, unites people in one way or the other by bringing them together under some kind of one in the Lusai Hills under one administrative units using different tactics of subjugation and some administrative arrangement. And this unified administrative system under the colonial power gives them a sense of opportunity to create from a uh, sort of a village republic into a larger community identity, either consciously or unconsciously. And the advent of colonial power, especially in the Lusai Hills, Mizo Hills, is very critical in the historical evolution and formation of their identities. And some writers, uh, I just want to highlight because since I'm most familiar with within three categories, the Kuki, Chin, and Mizo. So I just want to highlight few points of the uh, that the idea of Mizo as an epistemic category. Some writers make a claim that the word Lusai and the people living in the Lusai Hills were misunderstood even during the colonial period. Lusai should not be pronounced, Lusai should be pronounced as Lushe in local vernacular. And at the same time, one needs to know that uh, the word Lushe cannot be equated with uh, Mizo history, since the term Lusei alone does not represent all, even within Mizoram, not to talk about Myanmar or Manipur, Tripura, Assam, or Bangladesh. Even within Mizoram alone, Lusei does not represent all Mizo tribes and subtribes or subclans. With some reservations, one may argue that the people of the present Mizoram state largely identify themselves as Mizo, though this general designation or claim is not without any controversy. Who the Mizos really are may not be quite apparent on deeper investigation, while seeming to be quite unproblematic for some people, especially those who live in the northern part of Mizoram. The popular discourse that claims that all those tribes who are Chilungchuak, those who share the mythical origin that I have already mentioned before, are Mizo. However, uh, Professor Joy has made a very interesting point in her book, Being Mizo. She says, a discursive practice indulged by the Mizo themselves that depends on historicization of the myth creates inconsistencies in the formal templates of those included as Chinlungchua, thus revealing a lack of clarity regarding which tribes actually form the Mizo, supposedly as collective and inclusive identity. And at the same time, our friend Dr. Sam also talked about his writings last night. Uh, uh, Wumsom Chuantak argues that the British initially used the term uh, Lusye, spelling Loosye. However, the British later adopted Lushai, Lushai, as the official designation for Zhou people living in the western part of Zhou country, as the ruling clans of these people were known to them as Lushai. So Wumson's historical account in his Zhou history is somehow, I find it, especially when we talk about Zhou identity, it's quite inclusive and liberating, because his notion of Zhou is not limited or restricted into one territory or geographical space. And he even, I just talk about one of his writings, and he even called Mizoram as West Zoram, and the present Mizoram as West Zoram. So it's a part of the Zhou nation, and Mizoram is simply a West Zoram, according to Wumson's imagination. And at the same time, people people in Mizoram who are collectively known as Mizo want to see themselves as a separate nationality among tribes in the Indian subcontinent. although they cannot deny the existence of several tribes among themselves. So, but they have not been able to produce sometimes terminologies, especially in the Mizo language, which can make distinction among race, nationality, tribe, clan, etc. Because they use the words mostly nam, chi, to refer all those concepts and the categories which create a lot of confusion, not only among the general masses, but also within the academia. Recently, there have been a series of discussions and debates on televisions and social media regarding the Constitution of India Scheduled Tribe List 1950, Part 17, which particularly deals with tribes recognized by law under the Constitution of India. The main concern in the Scheduled Tribe List is the equation of Mizo with Lusai when it talks about various tribes in Mizoram. So if you look at the Scheduled Tribe List of Mizoram, and the any Lusai is equated with Mizo. So that we already talked about in the first part of the speech, because one cannot simply equate Lusei with Mizo. Lusei is only one part of Mizo. So there has been some debates and discussions on this scheduled tribe list. The reason why I'm taking this example of scheduled tribe list is, since the colonial period, sometimes we take these colonial categories like the cookies or Lushai or even Chin uh, uh, as a given identity. We take them for granted as a God-given identity, without which some people also think that we will not be able to survive in this part of the world. So I just want to sort of uh, 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 ask this question. Are we trapped in those uh, colonial categories? Are we too loyal to those colonial constructed concepts and categories when we talk about our collective identity? Does these colonial categories create problems for our collective merge towards a more uh, inclusive, a more dynamic notion of our collective identity? And I would like to talk a bit about uh, the problems in the Chin Hills as well, even though uh, 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 people like Lian Sakong claims that this Chin, the category of Chin is it's not necessarily a colonial category. It's sort of, it has this sort of origin from the word Chinlung. Chinlung is that mythical cave that we already discussed. So at the same time, one may find it problematic to simply accept Chin as a non-colonial category. And, and even when it comes to the Kuki or Lusai, and because we started using, if we look at history, we started using those categories only after the British came to this part of the world. So we look at ourselves from their, we study ourselves from their writings. We look at ourselves from their colonial lens, and we take those imposed identities, those classifications, the tribe classifications, the clan classifications by the colonial authority as a natural identity sometimes, not all the time. So even the problem right now in Manipur, uh, uh, some must have better knowledge than me, but when we even talk about territorial council in Manipur, because I want to touch a bit about the politics, our collective struggle or survival, or our collective attempt to survive as a community or groups of people. Even when we talk about the Territorial Council in Manipur, there has always been this tussle between the Kuki and Zomi group on the name itself. So that is very genuine concern, and sometimes our because I went to Manipur last year, and with Sam and his friends, we had a very wonderful discussion on this same issue. And sometimes it looks as if our Kuki brothers and sisters sometimes uh, even also uh, think that Kuki is the most original identity that we have, and Kuki is the uh, oldest identity that we have in our history. So maybe we can use Kuki as the overarching identity for all these Zo people. So I think that kind of tendency is always there in almost every community, not only among the Kukis, even the Lusai, even the Chins. So even when there was a census in the in Myanmar in 2014, there are lots of controversies and problems, and because our people mostly were identified as Chin under one umbrella, but even within that, there are, uh, according to reports, the Chin have 53 sub-ethnic groups, and uh, there's this one there's this rumors that groups have different groups within that even Chin group have asked to be recognized as a separate ethnicity and not as a sub-ethnic group, while others have requested they change their affiliation from one ethnic group to another. So we have also seen this, the Walmo group, the even different kinds of the dim side and the halka side, uh, or even the Han side. There has been uh, 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 some controversies even during uh, the 2014 census, Burma census, and even after, even till today. So the reason why I'm pointing out all these things, all these political problems and controversies is uh, sometimes we normally think our identity, sort of given identity by the nation state where we are in, as natural. It cannot be changed. It is natural. It's a God-given identity. We cannot change it. Especially those groups of people are naturally the dominant groups among those uh, 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 people who live in different parts of uh, uh, Zo territory. If we look at Manipur, the dominant group in terms of number, the Thado Kuki group. And if we look at the case of Mizoram, the Lusei group, same thing. So the claim of being original, the claim of being older or even bigger in terms of number, that's okay. But when it comes to group identification, uh, I think it will be extremely difficult if we keep. So it's okay to have this conflicting narratives, conflicting sometimes conflict of interest. But if we are going to stick into those colonial categories imposed upon us by others, or even the post-colonial state like India, Myanmar, or even Bangladesh, the creating uh, a collective identity will be Herculean task. I'm not saying that we have to leave those identities that we already have given by colonial or the post-colonial state, but I think we should not limit ourselves into this uh, categories given by the colonial and the post-colonial state. We have to think beyond the given identities. That's why the conversation of Zoe identity is very important, because Zoe is, I think, the possible category where we can start our discussion, our conversation from all our differences. Okay. And to conclude, I would like to pose a few questions rather than conclusions for all of us to ponder upon. And firstly, how do we reconcile our primordial notion of identity of Chin Lungchuo, having shared cultural heritage and affinity with the kind of emerging multiple identities since the colonial period till date under different nation states, mainly India, Myanmar, Bangladesh. And can there be alternative ways of looking at this Chin Kuki Mizo group as having one commonly accepted or conceptual frame, like the Zhou or Zhou people? Where can we begin to think? Where we can begin to think or even imagine our collective future? Does that pose at the same time a more serious challenge of multiple divisions from the present division? And can we think some sort of given identities like Chin, Kuki, Mizo as a very fluid concept, which is not fixated in any particular historical or cultural or territorial boundaries and context? Thank you. Okay, that's all for the talk.
Thank you so much, Sir Zalnuna. That was a wonderful and insightful and very clear talk on Zoe identity. We are very grateful to you. Now we will very swiftly move on to the question and answer round. Before that, I want to announce that anybody who has any question can always drop their question at the Q&A box that would be displayed at the bottom of your screens. So you can type all your questions there. The first question we have is from Sir Emmanuel Leram Nkima. I will read it out. Thank you for the insightful talk, sir. There is a general tendency to differentiate between mainstream Indian nationalism and culture from that of the Mizo or Zo identity, depicting greater sympathy towards the East or Southeast Asian cultures and identity. However, would it be untruthful on our part to deny the benefits of certain aspects of our historical contact with the mainstream Indian culture in the form of a number of learnings, developments, and growth of the Mizo or Zo people? Do you feel that coming together of the two broad cultures mentioned needs to also academically appreciate the value of the Mizos or Zo's contact with the other, that is, the mainstream Indian culture?
Okay, that's a very
Yes, that's a
important,
longish question.
long, and there are, I think, it can be divided into two, three parts. Maybe
Yes,
let me
you
try.
take your
Yeah.
time. Yes, you can read the
Okay.
question again.
Okay. It's a general tendency. Of course, yes, there's a general tendency to differentiate between mainstream Indian nationalism and culture from that of the Mizo or Zo identity, depicting greater sympathy towards the East or Southeast Asian cultures and identity. However, would it be untruthful on our part to deny the benefits of certain aspects of our historical context, mainstream Indian culture in the form of number of learnings? And okay, okay, I think very good point. We do benefit a lot from our affiliation with the Indian state, India, because in 1946, when the Mizo Union was born, and there was another party which was born in 1947, the Zalianpol, the United Mizo Freedom Organization. Especially, let's give the example from Mizoram. Even though there can be other examples from Manipur or even Chin State or Assam or Tripura. And the Mizo Union Party decided to be a part of India. So whether we like it or not, right now we are those who are within India, we are under Indian Union. So we benefited a lot from the Indian state in terms of development, education, etc. At the same time, I think, I guess, uh, uh, sometimes there is this uh, sense that we owe a lot to the Indian state. So I think it is, whether we are in India or whether we are independent or whether we're in Myanmar or Bangladesh. So we don't owe anything to any nation or any country, because it is the responsibility of any country, any nation state to take care of its citizens, whether it's in Myanmar or Bangladesh or India. So at the same time, uh, we also have this soft corner for those who are in the East or who are from the East or Southeast Asian, because of maybe some shared cultures or identity. That's true. And the any culture cannot survive alone. So we need cultures interact with each other, so they enrich each other, whether the Indian culture or the Manipur culture or the Mizo culture or whatever it is. So we do benefit, all of us benefit. They also benefit from us. We also benefit from us. But that doesn't mean that we owe a lot of things to them. So we are part of India right now because our first generation leaders decided to be with India. Okay, I hope that answers the question. I may not be able to clearly uh, answer the question. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. We shall move on to the next question. My question is regarding the unification of Zona Tlak tribes under one umbrella or nation. As you have mentioned, several Zona Tlak tribes choose to identify themselves based on their subtribe, whereas neglecting their collective identity. So how should we solve the notion of others that existed in the popular discourse? Do you believe that constructing a new nomenclature could give us a solid identity?
Thank you so much for the question, and it's a very difficult question indeed. And uh, we choose to identify ourselves based on sub-tribes, whereas neglecting the collective identity. Of course, it's true because of practical problems, among many other reasons. One reason is because of practical problems, because we live in various parts of this South Asian region, and sometimes we cannot simply blame those groups of people who uh, sort of want to protect that subgroup identity. There's no harm in that. We can protect our subgroup identification, sub-tribe, sub-clan, but at the same time, what I was trying to argue was that's not the end. We cannot simply remove, or we cannot simply run away from this existing reality, because they are our lived reality. And sometimes the economic aspects also come, political and economic aspect, and you have to earn your bread and butter. At the same time, the question of identity, the collective identity, and the discussion and conversation of this kind of issues hardly reach the general masses, because right now it's more of an intellectual exercise. The intellectual exercise sometimes I find it very difficult to uh, uh, think about how to sort of uh, transfer those discussions or make it understandable to the people on the ground, because sometimes intellectual discussion alone uh, is not enough. So it's not enough, but it's a good beginning. If we are able to have, it will be a good beginning if we're able to have a intellectual discussion, academic discussion, because we need to sort of think about what who we are and what we who we want to be at the intellectual level. But at the practical level, in real life, things will be a little different, because we all fight for our survival in wherever we are. And creating a new nomenclature is ideally be great. But right now, I think uh, uh, this is also a stumbling block for all of us, the Chin Kuki Mizo group. So I guess uh, we need not right now. We need not create. We did not create this commonly accepted nomenclature, which is inclusive and acceptable to everyone. That's difficult for now. So people have tried, but they failed. All of them failed. We have not been able to do that. Maybe we can start a conversation under this in places like this, and see what the response of the people, the masses, and see if there is any possibility. But to me, a new category which is not colonial or imposed by uh, nation state, either India, Myanmar, or Bangladesh, would be a great idea. I think Zoe, the idea of Zoe maybe or could be the starting point. So there can be disagreement. I accept that.
That was the same question that came to my mind, sir. I was thinking of a different nomenclature, but as of now, I think that's pretty difficult for academicians as well as for the people at large, right? And I just want to ask you, do you ever thought about it, a new category or a new term to identify us?
Uh, the problem is because of our political reality, it's very difficult to have a conclusive statement on this particular issue. And because in the talk, we already discussed about the problem of having commonly accepted territorial council in Manipur alone.
Mm-hmm.
So it was difficult. So some people want Kuki, some people want Zo, territorial council, some people want Zomi. So it's difficult. So in reality, right now, what I see is a very grim future to have a commonly accepted term or nomenclature. But that doesn't mean that we should not strive for that. We should not pursue that project. And it may take time, because any kind of identity, even our identity, is not a finished product. And it's been a work in progress. So if we sort of think it as a work in progress term or concept, I think that would be more liberating. Because if we think in terms of a fixed category, uh, there is no space for disagreement. There is no space for interrogation. So I think it would be more sort of appropriate to think identity as a fluid concept, even the category itself.
Understood. Yes, identities are not fixed and we keep negotiating them, right? So we will keep negotiating our Zo identity and eventually maybe we can come to a more inclusive one. Now let's move on to the next question. Dear Zonuna, thank you for the educative talk. Could you please elaborate about the old Kuki groups, which you briefly mentioned in your talk?
Okay, the Old Kuki group. In the talk, we discuss about the early migration of the Old Kuki group from the eastern part, the westward migration. Those are the Old Kuki, because the British mainly categorized this our people, the Chin Kuki Mizo group, into two groups: the old and the new Kuki group. The old Kuki groups are the one who migrated a little earlier than the the so-called Mizo community, the Lusei dominated Mizo community, because these groups of people, uh, suppose in if you look at Tripura, because of that tribal feuds and fights, they had to move out of the present Mizo hills, like the Halam Kuki, I think even Darlong, Trankol, and etc. Those communities are categorized as all Kuki group. There are many more categories. So the people that we can see right now are the Halam Kuki group in Tripura.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Sir Zonun, that was a wonderful talk. Sir, do you think it is possible for all the Zo tribes to come under the same administration? Is it possible for us to accept only one nomenclature, like only the Mizo instead of the Kuki Tin Mizo, so that we have less identity crisis?
I think that's a very wonderful, yeah, very good question, but difficult to answer. And is it possible? If we think it's possible, I think it will be possible. If we ourselves think it's not possible, it will be extremely difficult to achieve that. At the same time, uh, new nations are born after every maybe 50 years or 40, 60 years. So even the present Indian nation was born only in 1947. Before that, there was no independent country called India. And the British came in the 16th, 17th century, and then they annexed the continent, and they sort of unite different kings and regions. And the new nation was born in 1947 from the British colonization. So I think uh, when it comes to possibility of uh, the birth of a new nation of all Zo tribes, I think it's possible. We don't know when and how long it will take. We do not know, but I think it's possible. And the same thing of having a only one nomenclature, uh, we will also need more time, because right now we all know that it is not possible right now, but I hope it will be possible in the future.
Thank you, sir. Let's now move on to the second last question. Oh no, there are a few more questions. Sir, with politically charged environment we lived in India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and our deep-rooted mentality in our supremacy, be it Mizo, Tsin, Kuki, the first question, do you feel Mizoram state, being the most progressive, has a huge responsibility to spearhead the Zo identity? Recently, festival called Zo Kutbui was organized. The second question, if Zo is not acceptable, what is your opinion on having a nomenclature Tikim to include Tsin, Kuki, Mizo? Will it be possible to have a cultural inpui or supreme house for all Zo?
Hmm. Very interesting. Three important questions. The first point is, yeah, Mizoram being maybe a relatively developed state under India. Yeah, I do agree that it has a big responsibility to spearhead this movement. I would rather call it movement now because it's it's not only about the academic exercise. And and Zokutpui was organized recently in Tripura and Manipur. I guess it was quite successful. And the Mizo Union in 1946, they also changed this Lusei into Mizo to make it more inclusive. But our common use of Mizo is a little different from the Mizo Union's notion of Mizo during that time. So the Mizo Union tried, and people like Puechke Boichoka has a Markobung. They had gone to this different places of Zo inhabited areas to preach this uh, gospel of unification, but it was not very successful. And then again, the MNF tried. The MNF party under the leadership of Pulal Denga tried, and with sort of some uh, violent means, and they are not successful. At the same time, Mizoram being the relatively progressive state has a big responsibility. I think even though there has been some sort of feeling of, I don't know how will I call it, betrayal on the MNF movement and the aftermath, especially when the peace accord was signed in 1986. There was a feeling of betrayal among our brothers and sisters outside the present Mizoram. That was a genuine concern. I think the MNF party itself, I don't know if they really want to mobilize people. I guess they have some sort of legitimacy if they really want to mobilize people. And I think they are the one who also organized the Zokutpui in Tripura and Manipur, and they're still planning to do it there in Myanmar. So yeah, and the second point is, if Zo is not acceptable, I think we have already discussed this, so I would skip this second part, the nomenclature, uh, because the nomenclature, there will always be disagreement for the time being right now. And will it be possible to have a cultural input? I think this is a very good idea to have some sort of cultural input, supreme house for all the Zo people, whether they are from Bangladesh or Myanmar or uh, uh, Manipur or Mizoram or Assam, Meghalaya. I think it is very important for our community leaders to ponder upon this particular issue, the cultural input. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a quick announcement. The feedback link is posted in the chat box. Participants are requested to fill it up for tonight's feedback form. Let's move on to the next question. Sir, do you think a distinct scripture for the Zos will enhance our sentiment apart from our different dialects towards our identity So please give us your thought on scripture.
Hmm.
Scripture, I think scripture by meaning, I think a separate script maybe.
Scripture, distinct scripture. I don't know whether it's talking about the holy book or script.
I think he's meaning to talk about the script, a separate
Okay,
script, not
okay,
using the.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Having a distinct or separate script for all those people. I think my friend Sam already talked about this last night, and having uh, sort of a lingua franca. I think we talked about that last night, and separate script for also. I think if possible, I think it would be a good idea to sort of mobilize people and unite people from different regions, because that will give us some sort of uh, common literature, uh, and then that will enrich our literature. But at the same time, the problem is what kind of script would be that common script. So that is another
Mhm.
big question. So if it's possible, if it is acceptable to all, I think that's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. We have several questions not answered yet. I will read out one question that has been forwarded to me. It's the question goes: Zoe scholarship, fortunately or not, emerged in the 20th century in the post-colonial landscape. So, right from the start, as scholars, we are naturally imbibed with the ethos of post colonialism, largely manifested in the form of antipathy towards the colonial West. At the same time, a first glance into Zoe scholarship shows that Zoe scholarship till today is merely but an extension of the colonial scholarship on Zoe people. For instance, any issue on the question of the legitimacy of zoneness, our first impulse is to resort to colonial literature. Do you see this as an issue? What is your take on this? This is a question to both Sir Zonun and Sir Samuel from Henry Bomju, PhD scholar, IIT Bombay.
That's very interesting take on colonialism. It's true. Uh, at the same time, I have a slight disagreement with Henry, because uh, 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 it's very important that we use the colonial sources. We still use the colonial categories, terms, terminologies when we talk about our identity. And we cannot simply reject all colonial histories and narratives, uh, because our written history started from the colonial period only. Before that, it's oral history. So we cannot simply neglect the colonial historiography. And at the same time, the challenge to before us is, uh, rather than simply accepting whatever the colonial narratives project or propose, we need to have, like some said last night, our own uh, 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 notion of ourselves apart from the colonially imposed categories and identities. So we can also use those uh, colonial sources for to build our arguments. At the same time, the simple acceptance or the uncritical acceptance of everything which is colonial is problematic. So we are sort of sandwiched between these two things. We cannot simply reject the colonial uh, categories or the colonial sources when we study our history, when we study about ourselves. But at the same time, there are uh, uh, some literatures. Suppose, let me give one example. Uh, we normally call ourselves headhunters. And when we talk about headhunters, the colonial, it seems to me that when we read this colonial narrative, it seems to me that this headhunting tradition is sort of kind of derogatory. Yeah, it was a common practice, but headhunting is there in a society in the world who are not brutal or who are always peaceful. Even if we look at the Greek society, it's full of wars. They also cut their heads when they have wars. So the headhunting identity, some people may not find it problematic, but I find it problematic because it has a different connotation. So I think we need to sort of uh, uh, interrogate some of the categories and concepts which the colonial authority and scholars produce. At the same time, we can use some of them in a positive way. Okay.
When you mentioned headhunting, I remember our speaker for tomorrow, Professor Rindike, used to tell us in MZU that we are not headhunters. Our ancestors were not headhunters. So I think this, the concept of headhunting has been a concept that is very popular among the Mizos, especially, you know, if you look at some of the more recent YouTube videos on Genie and the rapper Genie and the politics behind that. Many people commented on his video that Mizos are headhunters. I think we really, as Mizos, I think we really need to look into this more clearly and establish, you know, a definite conclusion on this. So I just wanted to add
Can I
that.
can I just
Yes,
add
yes.
one more thing there? Because sometimes we normally tend to use that identity, that categorization as overarching identity. So putting all other multiple identities under the carpet. So headhunting was like one of the tradition during the time because they had to protect their people. So even in among the Nagas, it was popular at some point of time, but that doesn't give that the identity that the overarching identity that or reductionist identity that we are headhunters. So we may practice headhunters at some point of time. So that's my point.
Okay.
Can I
Let's
just
quickly
come in
move
there,
on to the
please?
next.
Can
Yes,
I
sure,
just come in there? You're speaking about headhunting, right? I
Yes.
chose to differ with the speaker, unfortunately, that we don't hunt heads, you know, because it is necessary. But there's another reason for bringing, it's almost like, you know, like a proof. Okay, so I don't think we should accept this by saying that we used to be originally headhunters. Now, if you look into the story and other stories of the, for example, the Nagas and all that, we do not hunt heads indiscriminately. I would really object to that kind of, you know, label being used against the Mizo or the Zo for whatever reason. Because if you look into whatever, why they used to bring home the heads of the enemies, the context is very different from discriminate head huntings. You know, if you say that, oh, originally we used to be headhunters, it's almost tantamount to saying that we are almost like cannibals, right? So I think we have to look into that more carefully. And in fact, in this age and time, we should always object to that labeling. Thank you.
Okay. I totally agree with that, with Professor Adik. Yeah, it was a kind of evidence. Like during those period, there was no modern judicial system. In our judicial system right now, whenever you present a case, you need evidence. So they kill their enemy, and for evidence, they have they need to have something. Sometimes it's not about the head. Sometimes it's only some part of the skin, the hair or the ears or whatever. So that's the reason why I also have a little problem with this categorization. I totally agree with Professor Aditi.
Thank you. So we can conclude that the Mizos did not hunt heads for the sake of it, right? It was more of a trophy, right? Okay, let's move on to the next question. I am just wondering how much of our territorial positioning within a state has kept our cultural identity, for instance, as Sikkim, on the back of the seat, and that of our political identities in whatever form it takes, as Mizo in Mizoram or as in the Teen state, more practically relevant. Is the debate on nomenclature a useless distraction, and should our conversations move beyond this debate?
That's very important. How much of our territorial positioning within a state has kept out cultural identity? Yeah. For instance, yeah, Sikkim on the back seat and that of our political identities in whatever form. I think that's a very important point. Yeah, I also personally think that the debate on nomenclature right now is a sort of a distraction because we are not moving forward. So the conversation, I don't know, it's because it will be always uh, a vicious circle whenever we talk about this nomenclature thing, the same old debate. So I think that's a very interesting or liberating way of looking at our identity to move beyond this debate on nomenclature. I totally agree with you.
Okay, thank you. The last question from the chat box. Thank you for the insightful talk. I also really appreciate your emphasis on the importance of recognizing the fluid nature of identity and the need to negotiate. However, with the multiplicity of experiences, especially today, under the different form of administrative context we are under, how do you suggest we ideally bind together our multiple and fluid experiences under one ZO project? What factors and/or stakeholders do you think are the more important?
Hmm. Okay, another important uh, uh, point. What factors and stakeholders do you think are more important, which can bind us together, our multiple and fluid experience under one ZO project? I think we are all important and responsible, but at the same time, even though we can do our bit in wherever we are, so uh, at the same time, our leaders, community leaders, are very important. They have very critical role to play. Our political leaders, community leaders, because they are the one who are supposed to shape the discourse. Even within academic, we can talk and discuss about it, but at the end of the day, it's it depends on how our politicians, our political leaders, our community leaders act upon it. I hope we will see more collaborative efforts in the near future, maybe after the pandemic. The Mizoram government also has some interesting plans. So the kind of cultural uh, 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 festivals that they used to organize in different parts, whether it's in Chin State or Manipur or Zampui Hills or even Haflong. So we need to do more of that, because that's the place where we can interact face to face, and that's the place where we learn from each other and make connections and see the possible future for all of us. I think it's very important, but community leaders, apart from the general population, community leaders and our political leaders can play a very important role to bring us together.
Thank you. There is another question that has recently come in. It's from K. Vanlal Nepuya. Was beheading the enemy's head for the trophy or of the prize true headhunting? I'm not really sure what he's trying to say. If not, why shall our ancestors cut their heads off? For trophy, for prize? If yes, they hunted for heads so as to earn their trophy. Is that right?
Actually, I think Professor Adiki has already clarified this part. And they did not hunt for heads, because during those days, the village were sort of independent. It village, they're under one chiefs, and they are also known by the name of their chiefs, Lalvungkua, Lalsavungkua, Lalulakua, and then, but in order to inter-village or inter-tribal feuds was very common during the time, and and because we all know that most of the villages are on top of the mountain, so that they will be able to have a better strategic position when they have war and fights between those villages or those chiefs. And they did not actually hunt for head. They have enemy, they have to protect their land, people from the enemy, and when they kill their enemy, just to prove that they killed their enemy, they had to show the evidence to their chiefs and their fellow citizens or villagers. So I think that's the reason why they did that kind of practice. Not necessarily a prize, or I wouldn't even say a trophy. It's just one traditional juridical system of evidence to show to the people that we have done this for our land, to protect our people.
Okay, thank you. There's another question. I think this would be our last question. Though politically divided, having shared history and cultural identity, don't you think we already have a collective identity as Zo people or Zo Natlak? How far do you think we need to involve ourselves in narratives, or how else can we include all under one collective identity other than Zo? Were
Yeah.
you able to understand, sir?
Yeah, it's a very vast question. I think let me say something like this. And yeah, even though, even with the existence of a variety of conflicting ideas, propositions from different standpoints uh, among this Chin Kuki Mizo group, and we all know that we have some kind of commonality, shared, some kind of shared history and cultural heritage. And it's just that because of the practical problems, since we are already divided by nation states, the territorial states, even within a particular nation like India. So we still have problems, because we are already given a particular identity recognized by the legal institutional mechanism of the particular nation state. So we cannot simply take away those given identities, as I've already said, because uh, we all need to survive politically, economically. We get benefit because of those given identities, our tribal identity. So whether we like it or not. But at the same time, there's this general sort of acceptance amongst the Chin Kuki Mizo group that we are one, even though we are divided into different territories, political or geographical territories. We are one, but how do we move forward from this particular stage? It's a great challenge. What would be the next step? What would be the next stages of development? Would be a great challenge for us.
Thank you. Just a personal question and a personal note that I want to add from my side. I I used to have a friend, a Kuki friend. He's living in Manipur right now. He used to tell me that his grandfather reads the Bible in Mizo and that he identifies wholly as Zo Naklak. And but in the more recent generations, in the younger generations, I think, we this idea of the Zo as this idea that we are a people who come from a similar background, who share history. All that has been lost. I mean, a lot of it, a whole chunk of it has been lost, and it has not passed on to the younger generations. And just one question: how do you think that is the case, especially in Mizoram, among the Mizo people? And if so, how do we rectify this?
I think that's true to some extent, because uh, we are uh, caught up with a lot of other things apart from our identity. And some of us, it seems to me, that are very satisfied with our present status. And normally, even during the colonial time, even till today, the post-colonial state, the I would like to sort of stress, which is a little different from our talk, but the class angle, the privileged class, right from the beginning, are generally the collaborators of the colonial authority. And even though because they are educated by the uh, colonial authority, sometimes the missionaries, most of them may be missionaries. So this the class angle has always been there. The privileged class in every society, whether it's Mizo or Kuki or Chin society, there has always been this the privileged and the underprivileged group of people. And even if we look at the uh, 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 context in Chin state, in Myanmar, and our people, the Zo people, especially after the military coup under General New Win, there are some groups of people who are very close to the military junta, and those who actually suffer at the hands of the military junta is the one who are the marginalized, especially the marginalized part of the Chin state, like the Halka, Falam, or some other places, or Tidim. So our people from this Mandalay or Rangoon. Even there are quite a few Mizos over there. They joined army. They were more or less very close to the military junta. Even in India, that's the same thing. So sometimes our sort of benefits or any economic comforts makes us forget those old ties and old or primordial identities.
Okay, thank you. I request Dr. Samuel or Professor Adiki if they have any questions, or any comments. Or from the other panelists.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I really want to make some comments about it. Last night's talk and today I came in late, but I was able to understand a little bit of what has been said. And as you would know, Janet, right? When we talk about this Zoe conversation on Zoe and all that, we have to think in terms of what is happening in the post-colonial world at this point of time, right? And it's good that we have started the conversation, right? There are a lot of things that we still have to do. And nobody, like, for example, the speaker has suggested that the community leaders, the politicians are important. Now, all of us are important, right? And I don't think we can ever come under one umbrella of, whether to take one single nomenclature like miso or cookie like that. Let it just be a zo nathak or whatever it is. And within that, there could be there are lots and lots of diversities. Now, last night there was a comment on a writer, Vusom, or I forgot the name, where it was said that his writing is not at all intellectual. Now, we cannot think in terms of whether somebody who's writing about himself or the Zo or the whatever sub-tribe he belongs to, we cannot say that he's not intellectual. Now, the best thing that we could do right now when we have started this conversation is for us all to write about ourselves, and even write about ourselves about counter-right, the colonial writings also, the few documents that we have. I wonder if you have read all the colonial writings, that is the English superintendents who were posted here. And then another important aspect that I would like to point out is that I'm not against Christianity, right? I'm not against Christianity. But all of us are, I would say, even today, hesitate, right, to write about ourselves because at some point in our head, we continue to think about the religion that we have adopted from the West. Okay, can we really write about ourselves? Do we dare write about ourselves as we were and as we are today, right? That is what is important. Unless and until we have some hesitations, especially from the point of view of religion, etc., I don't think we would be able to come to a very original, authentic kind of writing about ourselves also. We should try and write about ourselves as we are. And I think that is important, because if you go to if you look at some of the Mizo writings, there is always this certain qualities that are being, there are a number of qualities, Christian qualities, all right, that are embedded in our notion of goodness, positiveness, etc. And I think we should go back to what we consider positive prior to the advent of Christianity, or even as a Mizo. And there's another thing that I would like to say, that, for instance, in the African continent, people have started, even in terms of translation also, right? There are many Mizo expressions, translation of folk tales, etc., in English. Now, there are many phrases or sayings which cannot be translated into English, all right? Now, why don't we just put it as it is in Mizo, and then maybe explain it in a footnote and all that. So at this point of time, I feel that it's good to start this conversation on Zo Natlak. And I don't think we'll be able to come or to have a common script also. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow, right? So I will be talking about it tomorrow. And anyway, we have a long way to go as yet. We have to shed our Western clothes, I would say, Western clothes. And then we have to think in terms of what Janet and all would know, what we say, the culture of hybridity also, right? And then it's not about going back to what we are and what, like that. There's this concept of hybridity after colonialism, right? But we also should not, it's not about the colonial West that we're talking about here. It's about the colonial India also that we have to take into consideration. All right, I don't know whether you have read about what administrators, Indian administrators have written about us. So many misconceptions are there. And therefore, it's our duty to sort of counter-right whatever misconceptions that is documented about us. Okay, so that is the comment that I would like to, although I have so many other comments, but okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Adiki. That was a very interesting and a very thought-provoking point and comments that you had. I think, sir, Dr. Samuel has some comments or some questions.
Just a small comment. I would like to thank Jonuna for the talk from my side, because it was really insightful. I really enjoyed journeying with you in that genealogical trace of our Zhou tradition. I learned a lot, and also from the conversations. I think many issues came up from the conversations, and the way you engaged with the questions, I've learned so much, especially from you. So I really want to thank you for that. And of course, also from the comments that has just come in, we can learn so many things. So I want to thank Professor Dicky also for that. I think I just want to make a small comment about two things. First, if I may return to the idea of head hunting, because I think a comment just came in from someone in the group, and I thought I might add something to that. Although I don't know too much about head hunting, but I thought it's important to place head hunting into its proper context in some sense. I think when we talk about Zhou tradition, or when we talk about writing as who we are in some sense, when we talk especially about a pre-Christian history, in a sense, whether head hunting as a category captures the practice of taking heads or not is another topic that we can discuss. But something like that happened is something that we can all, to some extent, agree. And I think when we look at the Zoe world, especially pre-Christian, we have to understand that it's a world that is full of spirits. That's why I always term, when I talk about Zoe tradition, I always say Zoe spirit world or Zoe spirit tradition, because even if you move from one village to the other, there are rituals involved in terms of what animals you kill, what spirits you worship when you go to a village or when you move from one village to the other. And so our whole world, I would say, our relationship, our obligation towards one another was also in some sense spiritually defined. And when I say spiritually, I'm talking about spirits, not spiritually in the way we understand. And so there are obligations we have. For example, if someone kills someone from my family, I have an obligation to avenge because the spirits call for it. And if I don't avenge, then something bad is going to happen to me. And we definitely believed in something bad happening to us if we don't appease the spirits to some sense. Of course, I'm not talking about the evil spirits necessarily, because I don't like the category evil, good spirits, because there are a whole host of spirits involved. But there was definitely a spirit that wants vengeance, especially when someone close to you is killed. And being killed and dying is very different again. No spirits wants avenge for dying, but if someone is killed, especially treacherously, which is usually the case when we engage with others, then the only way to solve that is sometimes through killing. Of course, within the Zoe tradition, there are other ways to solve that. They can even call the Indongta, the councils, and talk amongst themselves and ask the spirits to see if there's another way to solve that. But so in that sense, there are people who actually take heads. And if we actually look at some of the histories of why they took heads, for example, if you look at some histories that are even mentioned by Kerry and Tuck, for example, these are cases where, for example, there was a case where in Manipur, not in Manipur, in Burma, a group of villagers wanted to congratulate one of the Burmese chiefs on having a new wife. No, so they send the congratulations. They send some people to give the congratulations, to give the gifts in some sense, and all of the people were beheaded. And so when you face something like that, of course they have to take heads, because that is what the spirit calls, because that is what even the spirit will say is treacherous murder. No, so if you look at some of the cases that even non-Zoe, like colonial authors will write, colonial accounts will write, the taking of heads are very related to first treacherous deaths, but also treacherous death is related also to the tussle over lands. Especially head hunting became a very significant phenomenon in the mid-19th and later on, because of the issue about plantation. British were trying to encroach, or British subjects were trying to encroach into Zoe lands, and encroaching again is something that is very serious for Zoes, not because of the way we understand territory, but because territories then, especially in pre-Christian Zoe tradition, territories were all ritualistically defined. No, you are clear about your territories because you have killed and spilled animal blood, letting you know which is your territory. If someone encroaches it, then there are spirits who call you to do something about it. No, so I thought maybe adding a little bit of that context into the conversation might be helpful. But I was also very interested about the debate about nomenclature, and I think I learned a lot just listening to Zonuna also. But I thought today I was just reading about the whole idea of category formation. Someone was talking about category formation, and he was talking about Christianity, and he said Christianity. He was talking about the category religion, and he said Christianity in the beginning did not like to categorize itself as a religion, because according to Saint Paul, religion is related to false paganism. So he said Christianity is not a religion. religion is everything that all the false pagans ascribe to themselves. No, but of course today we know that Christianity will be happy to categorize itself as a religion. So the point is, when we talk about category formation, there are no absolute ways in which we can say that this is an absolute category that is true for all time. It is always in the same sense that Zonuna talked about identity. It is sometimes always fluid, and it changes through the centuries in some sense. No, and so I think whenever we talk about even nomenclatures, it is important to know that nomenclatures are important, but they are not all that important. Because the reason I want to say that is because the way we sometimes talk about nomenclature is as if we say that if we have the right nomenclature, we will be united. No, but the reality is we are already united. We are much more united than Nagas. We are a family. We are a blood family. We are a kin and familial. We have kin and family ties that we cannot run away from. That is, I mean, we use this very simplistic phrase, but which I think is very important. Where when we say blood is thicker than water. No, we use this phrase, and it says a lot about how rich our oneness is. And so we are already united. We are not trying to find stories and narratives to say that if we find the right terms, if we find the right term that is applicable to all, then we will be united. No, we are already united. And I think the responsibility for us as scholars especially is to talk about those stories of unity. Let us write more about how united we are, because these are not stories we are trying to make up so that we can be politically united, have this and that. No, we have already learned how to live as those in different expressions and manifestations. No, and so I think that presupposition has to be challenged. Where, like for example, Zonuna talked about Manipur, and here even when we talk about territorial council, we struggle over the names, we argue over the names. But who is talking about the kind of life we are going to live under the territorial council? Nobody is talking about it. Can we talk about a Zo way of life, and then let even Indians give a name to it? We will change it in time, but the name is not the most important. But talking about that oneness that we have is important. And I think it is important to recover that oneness. And I think that is precisely what Zonuna was also mentioning and trying to stress. And I just want to say I really enjoyed listening to both the conversations and also the talk. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. Sir Ngura, do you have anything to add?
Everything is said so articulately, so let me just try to summarize in very short, a few sentences, what I take away from this.
Rich session. So Sir Zonuna has already laid out in a very subtle and diverse, rich, layered paper this whole question of Zo identity in a particular context. So to me, what I take away, my basic training is in philosophy. So I think in terms of basic philosophical categories, right? So the self and the other, right? So throughout our Zo experience from pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial, this frequent tension of who is a Mizo or a Zo, who is a Zo. So in that question, this tension between what constitutes the self, what is the boundary of the self, and what is the boundary of the other. This constant tension we have witnessed. Even now, it is ongoing. So someone who prioritizes the self or whatever one understands as the self for the moment might say, okay, identity or a Zo identity is what a Zo described at that point of time about himself or herself. Then someone who prioritizes the other aspect of that Zo identity might say, no, we don't live in this world in isolation. So in Dr. Sam might say in Heideggerian terms, we are all part of a cultural shared Dasein. So even a Zo is not a Leibnizian monad who is a singular, who is independent of everyone else. So the other also, the non-Zo also plays a part in defining and describing in constructing who a Zo is at a particular point of time. Now, I think the question is how much of otherness, influence from otherness might contribute in a healthy way what a Zo is, and how much of self-articulation should come in trying to construct or contribute to the Zo identity. To me, what I take away is the word multiplicity, fluidity, and hybridity. I think hybridity, Professor Adik has mentioned. History is full of experiences, not only of the Zos, but of other cultures, which testify to us quite adequately that no tribe, no community, no identity is formed in isolation, and no identity at any particular point of time in history is pure. So this whole notion of purity of identity, as if, it can be distilled in its purest form like Platonic ideas, this is an illusion, because historical experience has taught us that every single identity, including the Zo identity, is formed of multiplicity, mixture, and hybridity. So to me, even the road ahead for even greater and deeper commonality and common identification among the Zos, the road ahead perhaps is to accept, first of all, for ourselves that I am a product of multiplicities of Zo experiences. I am a product of multiplicities and varieties of ways of being Zo. So I myself am a hybrid. I myself am a multiplicity. So if we can accept and take within ourselves that kind of multiple heritage and multiplicity within the Zo tradition itself, then perhaps it may open us towards even the other in a healthy way, while not losing one sense of multiplicities of self. Maybe it can even open us up towards even the non-Zo other, the non-Zo diversity that we are exposed to. So perhaps to accept within ourselves that I am already composed of a network or a coalition of hybridities, multiplicities, and in some sense, therefore, a fluid identity. So perhaps from that starting point, we may even learn to look at even the so-called non-Zo, however we try to draw that boundary line, even the non-Zo influences, we may be able to filter it in a more intelligent manner. I mean, this is the only thought I have. Sorry for my rambling.
Thank you so much, Sarangura. That was a wonderful and a wonderful conclusion to tonight's talk. This gets interesting every minute, right? So I invite all of you, all the attendees, all the participants to join us tomorrow night again, and we will discuss more on it. I know that some people may still have questions, or some still want to comment, but let's leave that for tomorrow night. And so once again, we invite all of you. Thank you so much, Mr. Cizo Nunmoya again. That was a brilliant talk from you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
with that,